And this is a tutorial on active voice and passive voice, how to distinguish between the two, and some ideas about when to choose one or the other. When talking about active voice and passive voice, the easiest way to begin a discussion of determining which is which in a sentence is to talk about a term used by linguists called an agent. An agent is a term that identifies the doer of an action. Who is doing the main action, the action of a main verb in a sentence? Now, the agent is going to be the subject in an active voice sentence, and it'll be the object in the predicate in a passive voice sentence. Here are some examples to let you see what I'm talking about. The active sentence, Tom climbed the mountain. Tom is the agent, and he's the subject. He's the one doing the climbing in the active statement, in the active sentence. But in the passive sentence, the mountain was climbed by Tom. Tom has been shifted to an object of a preposition in the predicate of the sentence. And he's the agent there too, you see it listed. So that's the distinction that we make. In passive voice, the agent is sometimes an object of the prepositions by or for. Our weekly meeting is scheduled by Marilyn. It's passive. The agent is at the end of the sentence, and also the object of the preposition by. But often in passive voice, the agent is just implied rather than mentioned directly. Sometimes the agent is not actually even mentioned in the sentence. For example, the suspect was kept in solitary confinement. The suspect was kept by the police, and that's an implied agent in solitary confinement, but the agent isn't actually mentioned, and that happens a lot in passive voice sentences. But either way, in a passive voice sentence, the agent, the doer of the main verb's action, is not the subject. That's the first pre-verb part of the sentence. If the agent is the subject, if the agent is in the first pre-verb part of the sentence, then that sentence is an active voice. And here's an example. The county commissioners, that's our agent, our subject, are proposing, that's the main verb, new taxes this year. That's the new taxes is what they're proposing. If that sentence were flipped around to say new taxes were proposed this year, it's become passive. And again, we have an implied agent and object of a preposition there. New taxes were proposed, implied by the county commissioners this year. The transformation from an active sentence to a passive one is very simple, but it involves 3 steps. First, an object, which was usually the direct object in an active voice sentence, becomes the new subject. So in our example right there, new taxes, which had been the object of our sentence, now becomes the subject. And a form of the verb be is added as an auxiliary verb to the main verb. Were proposed, were being the auxiliary form of be, and proposed being the main verb. And the original agent, if mentioned at all, becomes an object in the predicate. And the predicate, again, is the last post-verb part of the sentence. By the county commissioners. That was our old subject, our old agent in the beginning of the sentence. Still the agent of action, it's still the doer, but now it's at the end of the sentence in the predicate. And that's the way an active voice sentence is changed to a passive voice. Importantly, don't confuse other auxiliary verb plus main verb combinations with being passive voice. Don't automatically assume because you see an auxiliary verb plus a main verb that the sentence is in passive voice. And here's an example. Tom will have climbed the mountain by tomorrow. This is just the sentence in future tense. This isn't in passive tense at all. Tom, the agent, is the one who is doing the action, is still in the subject of the sentence. So even though we have an auxiliary plus a main verb combination, it's still an active sentence. Here's another example. Thick green grass is covering that entire meadow. This is in the present tense. It's not a passive tense sentence, although we are using an auxiliary form of be and a main verb. Grass is still the agent, grass is still the subject of the sentence, comes before the main verb, and so it's still an active sentence. Take a minute here and look at these three sentences and try to determine for yourself which one is active, which ones are passive. Remember to look for the agent's place in the sentence. Is it in the subject part of the sentence, the preverb part, or is it in the predicate? And also to look for that auxiliary be plus main verb combination. Go ahead and pause your video while you do this, and then we'll come back with the answers. And now the answers. So the first one is active. The main office staff, that is the doer of the action. They will be going on strike. So the agent is in the subject before the verb. That sentence is active. They have been treated badly by management, however, as passive. They are being acted upon. The management is now an object of a preposition in the last half of the sentence, but they're the ones doing the treating of the office staff. And the last sentence is passive too. Thankfully, our paychecks were distributed by the company without delay. So again, we see that auxiliary be plus main verb combination, and the agent is in the predicate, the last part of the sentence. And that's what you want to look for in determining active or passive sentences. It's pretty simple. The old question of English teachers, and you've probably had one before, who's told you to always avoid passive voice, but that's not always the best idea. There are lots of reasons that you can use passive voice, and many reasons why you might want to choose to use passive voice. The main idea is to shift the focal point of a sentence's main idea. Do you need to? If I'm being asked the question, why does Joe walk with a limp? I want a passive construction there, because to answer my question, the question is, why does he walk with a limp? Because Joe was wounded in Iraq. Maybe if I know the rest of the story, I could just develop a subject to make that sentence active, but really the most concise and clearest way to state the main idea of this sentence is to put it in passive form. And it's similar with other conceptual ideas too. For example, this sentence, the Vikings are often equated with brutality. My main idea is not who equates the Vikings with brutality. It's simply the idea that the Vikings are often equated. The passive is fine. It's true that a sentence often does sound stronger and clearer when using the active voice rather than the passive. And oftentimes, if you can use the active voice, if you can put your agent in the subject position, you will be clearer to your reader than not. But passive voice is found frequently in academic and journalistic writing, either to avoid clumsy or informal usage, just like this sentence. And here's one way that I might change that sentence into an active one, and you'll see that it is a little clumsier. One frequently finds passive voice in academic writing, the old use of the non-specific one in the subject area, or you frequently find passive voice in academic writing, the general you. Perhaps both of those sound a little clumsier or less formal, and using the passive voice in that sentence is preferable. The passive voice can also be used to emphasize an idea or concept more than the agent that did the conceptualizing. You see this a lot in academic articles. For example, the passive voice sentence here is a lot more clear than the active voice sentence. Passive: patients using animal therapy were found to recover more quickly than patients who did not. Whereas if I required the agent to be put in and to make it an active voice sentence, it might just sound a little clumsier to you. Princeton conducted a blind study of 300 post-operative patients who underwent animal therapy and found that they blah, blah, blah. You can see how it gets a little clumsier and a little more difficult and less clear. That's the main idea, for your reader to put it in the active tense.